Hi, welcome to Culture and Causation. I'm Aaron Briley. And today's a special show because I'm joined by my colleague, Robert Begley, and he's here to help me discuss Jackie Robinson. Now, Robert wrote an article called Jackie Robinson, the Best Kind of American Hero, where he not only pays tribute to Robinson, but he also highlights a unique aspect of Robinson's story, and I think one that often gets overlooked. But before we talk more about Robinson, I want to welcome Robert to the show. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Aaron. Happy to be here talking about one of my heroes.
So this show is about Jackie Robinson, who broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball in 1945. And I'd love to introduce him in his own words. So I have a small excerpt from his autobiography. I never had it made. And here it is. So I want to read this. Quote, I'd become the first Black player in the major leagues. I was proud of that, and yet I was uneasy. I was proud to be in the hurricane eye of a significant breakthrough and to be used to prove that a sport can't be called national if Blacks are barred from it. Branch Rickey, the president of the Brooklyn Dodgers, had rudely awakened America. He was a man with high ideals, and he was also a shrewd businessman. Mr. Rickey had shocked some of his fellow baseball tycoons and angered others by deciding to smash the unwritten law that kept Blacks out of the big leagues. He had chosen me as the person to lead the way, unquote. So this is how Robinson broke the color barrier, which was significant in 1947. And actually, it was on April 15th of that year when he played his first game in the all-white major leagues. So, Robert, do you have any opening comments about Robinson before we get into his bio and some lessons from his life?
Yes, Aaron, I'll tell you what it was like. As a New Yorker, I was young, but I remember the day Jackie Robinson died. At the time, baseball was my favorite sport. I planned to be a baseball player. And Robinson was one of those idols. You had Mickey Mantle and you had, in my case, Tom Seaver. But Robinson was before my generation. But when he died, New York mourned because he made the most pivotal impact in baseball history, but even in American history. As we saw, many people, Martin Luther King followed his footsteps a generation later. So yes, in 1947, April 15th, and that's why we celebrate Jackie Robinson Day in baseball. And all the players had the option to wear number 42 in honor of Robinson. So he's been a part of my life since my childhood, and what a giant. That's all I can say for now about him.
And also, just to follow up on that, so you were there in New York on the day he died. And what was baseball like growing up in that area? I grew up in various places in Canada when I was very young, and also throughout the US. But I never really grew up in a neighborhood where baseball and baseball heroes were a dominant force in my neighborhood. So what was it like in New York with baseball?
Well, again, before I was born, New York had three baseball teams. By the time I was born, there were two, the Mets and the Yankees. And I lived so close to Yankee Stadium that when somebody hit a home run, we would run out through the window and we would hear the crowd, the live crowd. And I was so small, they'd let me go through the turnstile. So I'd attend like 50 games a year. It was a way for my mother to get me out of the house, me and eight other siblings. But baseball was the way out. It was the way out. Every inner city kid wanted to be a Jackie Robinson and then later on like a Willie Mays, because it was the dominant sport of the major sports back then. And that's why Robinson's impact was so significant. And the pace of baseball, it's kind of the prestige of it has gone down in succeeding generations. But back then, 1960s, 70s, it was the sport, especially in New York City. It was called the capital of baseball back then. And again, Robinson was a major factor in that being the case.
Wow. So I want to just maybe talk to you about some of the lessons that we can learn from Robinson, and particularly these lessons that you bring out in your article. But before that, let me just go through some of his highlights for people if they don't know much about Robinson or why he's so significant. So here are some dates, some general bio information from Robinson. And full disclosure, some of these dates are from Wikipedia, but I do think that they're accurate. So he was born in the South, in Cairo, Georgia, in 1919. He died in 1972, so he died very young. He was only 53 years old. And about a year or so after he was born, his father deserted the family. So his mother and 4 siblings moved to Pasadena, California. So Jackie was raised in California, in Pasadena. He goes on to Pasadena Junior College and then to UCLA. And what I remember reading about him was that he was just this incredible athlete. He was a star athlete and could play almost anything. Mm-hmm. So he was the first person at UCLA to letter in 4 sports. That was basketball, football, baseball, and track. And he also had a lot of athleticism in his family. His older brother, Mac Robinson, actually went to the Olympics, the 1936 Olympics in Berlin, and wins second place in the 200-meter race behind Jesse Owens. So that's very significant. Jackie Robinson looked up to his brother and saw, I think, that such huge feats were possible. Robinson then meets the love of his life, Rachel, in 1941 at UCLA, where she was attending, and she also graduated. And a side note, actually, on his wife, his then wife, his widow now, she's still alive. She's still alive at 99 years old. So
still active, still looks great, still an ambassador. Wonderful woman, wonderful human being.
She really is. And I think he credits her to a lot of his success. So she was this rock that he really needed going through everything that he went through. He then gets drafted into the Army in 1942, gets an honorable discharge in 1944, comes back to the States, wants to play baseball. So the only option that was open to him at the time was to play for the Negro Leagues. He begins playing for a team called the Kansas City Monarchs. He then gets recruited for the Brooklyn Dodgers and becomes the first Black person to play in the all-white major leagues in 1947. He earns numerous awards because he was just an all-around star athlete. So he wins Rookie of the Year in 1947. He wins the National League Most Valuable Player in 1949 and takes the Dodgers to multiple World Series, in which they end up winning in 1955. His career doesn't stop with the baseball. After that, he becomes the VP of Chock full of Nuts, which was a major corporation back then. He was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1962. And, after he dies, he was featured. He was the first baseball player to be featured on a postage stamp in 1982. So that was just a very brief snapshot of some of his accomplishments, but he really was this larger than life figure. And so it would take, I'm sure, 2 or 3 episodes to really do his entire bio some justice, which is why I just want to focus on a few lessons that you bring up in your article. So let's talk about that now. Now, your article called Jackie Robinson, the Best Kind of American Hero, makes a lot of great points. And you say in the article this, and I'll read a quote. Quote, Brooklyn Dodgers general manager Branch Rickey set out to challenge the unwritten racist code that prohibited Blacks from playing in the majors. But he needed the right man for the task. It had to be someone with both exceptional athletic talent and moral character, unquote. So I just want to pause on moral character for a moment, because that really jumped out for me. Mm-hmm. So I want to know from you, Robert, why was this so important to Branch Rickey? And could you say a bit more about Robinson's character?
Sure. So Robinson was 28 years old by the time he came to the major leagues, which is not, they were younger players who might have been better pure baseball players, but they didn't have the character that Robinson had, and for Branch Rickey, that was essential. And what is the character? The character is in their first interaction, Rickey called him every unprintable word in the book just to test his reaction, to see. And Robinson was boiling inside, but he kept his calm. And that was one way that Rickey knew he had the right man, because he said, if somebody hits you, at least for the first couple of years, Jackie, you, Robinson said, I was taught to fight back. And Rickey says, no, you have to be able to not fight back, because guess what? If somebody hits you and you hit them back, everybody's going to say, you see, that's why they don't belong here. They're animals, they're this, they're that. And so Rickey grilled Robinson for what was to come. And unfortunately, things were much worse for Robinson than in just this interaction. But what is character, Aaron? I mean, it's the ability to know who you are deep inside. And, what Kipling says in the poem If, to be above whatever criticisms, whatever names people call you. And so when Rickey saw that, he knew he had the right man.
Now, you also bring up in the article the virtue of integrity. And I was wondering if you could maybe say what you think that is and give some examples. I think you talk about he didn't give up his seat in the army, and he understood that, like, the value of non-violently resisting. So could you maybe discuss integrity and some examples?
Sure. So integrity means to be integrated between thought and action, mind and body, between what you preach, you practice what you preach. That is what integrity is. And Robinson was a man who stood up for his rights. When he saw injustices, he could not stay silent. So in the army, you're fighting on America's behalf. Okay, there's a world war going on, and you're fighting in defense of America, the freest country in the nation. And there's segregation within the army. So Robinson was like, look, we have to stop this, and I'm going to make a stand. So I'm not going to sit in an army bus. I'm not going to. He was court-martialed for that, and they resolved it. But it showed, and Rickey knew this about him. I mean, again, in a structured format that the army has, discipline is key, but justice is also key. So if you witness injustice and you sit there silently, meekly, then that eats at your integrity. And Robinson refused to do that. But also it was a way to get integration. So it wasn't as if he just came from out of the blue and then was planted with all of these white people around him and learned for the first time in life. He had been at UCLA. He had many, many encounters. And like all races, he saw some good ones and he saw some not so good ones, and acted accordingly, and usually treating them as individuals. We'll talk more about that later on.
Yeah, and you also bring up actually that his nonviolent approach was not only good for baseball, but this actually influenced one of the most influential civil rights speakers within the next decade or two. So, and I just want to quote this, and maybe you could speak about this a little bit. You say from your article, quote, Robinson's commitment to rights, justice, and a nonviolent approach to racial integration inspired Martin Luther King Jr., who said, quote, Jackie Robinson made my success possible. Without him, I would not have been able to do what I did, unquote. His nonviolent stance influenced Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, that's phenomenal.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. And what about it? Well, he is saying that force is not the answer. Okay, he's saying that the mind and reason, the things that make us human, should be the answer. We should come to solutions by persuasion instead of by force, or by example, and by being put in a situation where he looks different from everyone, plays differently from everyone, and is treated differently from everyone else. There's loneliness there in that. And Martin Luther King saw that and was drawn to it. And again, that ability to not fight back. and to remain calm when everyone else's heads, swimming around you, going back to the If poem. And so by the time King in the 1950s, and then again, it continued into the 1960s, King looked up to Robinson for sure. Everybody did. Frankly, everybody did. Mm-hmm.
Although it's interesting that you say that, because Robinson was also criticized by some of the more extreme elements of this Black liberation movement and the Black Panther Party, because he wasn't aggressive enough. Isn't that right?
And he was called an Uncle Tom, which is always, that's a last resort or a first resort when you think somebody is not doing what your gang wants to do. You want to label them an Uncle Tom. And Robinson was above that, just like he was above the criticism of whites. Similarly, he rejected the invalid criticism of the Black Panthers and knew that that was not the answer, that would cause more division, and never got caught up in that segment.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. So also, I think it's worth mentioning that Jackie Robinson was a committed husband to his wife, Rachel, who he credits with much of his success, as I brought up earlier. But it's probably worth saying a few words about Rachel.
Yeah, so they met when they were young. They were sweethearts. So she endured the entire arc of his success and his obstacles. And I mean, let's put yourself in his position. You go to your job, okay? And at your job, people are throwing baseballs at your head, okay? and their cleats they're trying to spike you with their cleats. They're trying to maim you or injure you physically. And then verbally, they're just taunting you. They're calling you every name in the book. That's your job. Now you go home at night. Do you think the whole universe is against you? You have some evidence that a big part of the universe is against you, but your beautiful wife is there. And then you just see the benevolence that she brings, and life is good. You're able to close the door of what's wrong with the culture and then embrace this beauty that this woman and their children bring to your life.
That's actually a great segue, because my next point is what I think Robinson exemplifies, and it's what Ayn Rand calls the benevolent universe premise. For me, what that means is, when you have this premise, it's a way of looking at the world, and it's a way of viewing the world as being hospitable, as being a place where our values are achievable. And I like to just give a contrast, especially if this is a new concept for people, on what this really looks like. So let's say we're looking at two people who are looking for work. And let's say we're looking at two people from the inner city, two young men who are looking for work. The one person feels like, everyone's against him, feels like society is racist, feels like he doesn't really have a shot anyway, but he'll just go ahead and go for an interview. But he doesn't, because he doesn't feel like his chances are that good, he doesn't prepare for the interview. He doesn't dress appropriately. He doesn't take it seriously. He shows up late. It sort of colors and conditions, like this viewpoint conditions everything that he does. And he's very defeatist. He might even feel like a victim. And consequently, he probably won't get the job. He's not displaying any confidence or self-assuredness. So it's his vicious cycle. He thinks that society and that getting a job probably isn't possible. He exudes all the sort of lack of confidence and self-doubt that worldview permits. And then he doesn't get the job. So that reinforces, see, I told you, I told you this, it's all for naught. Whereas the other person, by contrast, is someone in the same predicament from the same neighborhood, but he thinks, you know what, I can get a job. You know what, it is possible. I just need to work on my resume, work on my job pitch, dress up. I need to be respectful. I need to be excited that this is an opportunity that could change my life. And that person very often, I should say, goes in and maybe gets the job. So it's just fundamentally, at its core, it's a different way of viewing the universe and viewing one's position in it. And I think it really boils down to agency. It boils down to how someone views themselves and their ability to overcome obstacles. Does that sound about right to you?
Aaron, you that was the word: agency, choice, empowerment. All of these are on one side, and sadly, in the culture, we have victimhood, we have grievance. That's right now. That's kind of the fundamental split within the culture. Is how much is in our control. A real lot is in our control,
yep.
And how much is somebody else is out of our control. Okay, and Robinson exemplifies that because, again, when he was a child, he grew up, he got into trouble. Okay, he didn't have a father. If we come to the current culture where we have this high degree of single moms. Mm-hmm. So Robinson had that in the deep South. Okay, before they moved to California, could have gone down that wrong path, but he chose not to. Okay, his mother was a big influence on that direction, and then time after time he chose the right thing to do. Okay, and if I could, just one little quick sidebar on his legacy, Lou Alcindor, who became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, went to UCLA specifically because Jackie Robinson went there, and that was a big part. He wrote to Robinson, and Robinson recommended him. So just taking a major impact on another athlete, next generation athlete, and showing you that Robinson, each time he took that choice, and each young person in any situation always has the choice to act in their, what we would say, to do the right thing or not the right thing. And oftentimes those things they're pretty clear what is the right thing and what is not the right thing.
That's a really good point. And he was always he was always on the lookout for ways to improve his situation or in ways that would help him, right? He had a very active mind when it came to that. And one example, or one anecdote that comes to mind is that when he was in the Army and having a hard time, he wanted to be an officer. So I think you have to go to officer training. And they wouldn't let him in to officer training. So he befriended at the time, who was also in his, who was stationed, on the same base, was the boxing legend Joe Louis.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So he befriends Joe Louis, and Joe Louis then puts a word in to get him into this officer training school, in which Robinson then gets admitted and then graduates and becomes, I believe he becomes second lieutenant. So this idea of not taking no for an answer and pushing through, I think this is a hallmark skill that he had. And like you said,
Aaron, do you think Joe Louis had an opinion of Jackie Robinson's moral character? Do you think he would go to bat for him if he wondered at all whether Robinson was worth it? Would Louis put his own reputation on the line if he wasn't absolutely sure Robinson had an incredible moral character?
Right, exactly. I think that's a good point. He absolutely knew that Jackie was a safe bet. I could get behind this guy, and everyone will see this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
how about happiness? Can we go from benevolent sense of universe to happiness? And how do you maintain your happiness in a world where so much is against you in so many directions?
I think this is a great transition. I think it's great to bring up. I think a benevolent universe and happiness are the loveliest of bedfellows. And that's a great question. Do you have any comments on that, on how you can maintain your happiness when everything around you is, So
let's speak in terms of black and white. Okay. For the most physically distant, physically perceptual level, as we could say.
Okay.
Well, a white man went to bat. Branch Rickey put his entire, career on the line. When they voted, when the major league owners had to vote whether to bring in Robinson to allow a black man to play, all of them said no, except for Rickey. All right. but he got the commissioner who was from the South. He convinced the commissioner. So there's no determinism here. People had to make hard choices. And so that's one white guy that goes to bat for him. Then Pee Wee Reese from Cincinnati, the captain of the Dodgers baseball team, embraces Robinson. That's one of the most famous scenes in all baseball history. Is they're in Cincinnati, which was the South, and the fans are booing Robinson. And Pee Wee Reese comes and he puts his arm around him, saying, "This is my friend. This is a human being. He is my friend." And there's a statue of that in Brooklyn, of the two of them together, right outside in Coney Island in Brooklyn, to glorify that moment frozen in time. So white people are going to bat for him because they see the moral character. And what does that do to Robinson's view of happiness? Okay, it expands now. It's like he's not limited to just the black fans who are coming from all these different towns to watch him. Now it's transcending race. It's this benevolence that spills over, and there is example after example after example of this. So, I wasn't in his personal situation where I could guarantee how much happiness he had, but I know, with his wife, there was a high degree of that, as I alluded to earlier. But even in the interactions with other people, particularly, like we say, if we're leaving it on a perceptual level, white people in his life who literally went to bat for him.
Yeah, and that's good. I think I just want to certainly make a comment here. Happiness does not mean pleasure. So I want to make this distinction just so that we're clear. Each and every moment of his life wasn't pleasurable, but overall, the fulfillment that he had, the ability to achieve his values, the ability to make lasting friendships, I think this is what we can look at when we're evaluating whether or not he was happy or whether or not he had this state of happiness or this state of being fulfilled. So I think that's worth mentioning. Yeah. So finally, I want to discuss a point that you make in the article that really isn't discussed enough. And that is that racism is destructive because it harms the very people who practice it, not just those on the receiving end. So I also want to quote your wonderful article. You state, Robinson's and Ricky's success enabled other team owners to see the harm their racism was causing them and their teams. They too began signing Black players who in turn helped their teams win games and earn profits. This race revolution in baseball was helping many people to see the self-destructive nature of racism and the self-serving value of treating human beings as individuals, unquote. Could you explain this, Robert?
Yeah, so let's talk about rational self-interest and individualism. These are two concepts that are rarely talked about in the culture. And in terms of present day, when racism is smattered all over the place, racism is a form of collectivism. Ayn Rand has an article in Virtue of Selfishness book where she says that it's a form of collectivism and determinism. So basically it says your mind doesn't matter, just your skin color does. Your character doesn't matter, just your skin color does. And if we can go back to Robinson's influence on Martin Luther King Jr., what's more important, the color of your skin or the content of your character? And that's the part that's chosen here. Yeah. And the content of your character is you as an individual. So the individualism point is, I think it needs unpackaging because, again, if you're sitting in the stands in 1947 and pretty much everyone in the stands is white, everyone on the baseball field is white, there's one guy out there who's Black, he stands out. Just perceptually, he stands out, and there must be something that he's doing that causes admiration in you. Like if you're a conceptual being, so now you're rising above the perceptual level where you just see skin color. No, you see that this man is, again, dealing with taunts and physical assaults and verbal assaults. So Robinson did all these things, and by proving this, so the Dodgers now, wherever they played on the road, those, first of all, at home in Brooklyn, their attendance almost doubled from 1946 to 1947. But whenever they played in Philadelphia and Kansas City and other cities, Now twice the many fans would come out, and it wasn't just black fans, it was white fans too. They wanted to see this incredible human being. Some wanted to yell at him, some wanted to get under his skin, and some wanted to see this incredible. I mean, the thing about sports, okay, let's just take a step back. What is the appeal of sports? It's something that you get to see the human body achieving feats that you will likely never see in your life. And when Robinson got on base, for instance, okay, and now the pitcher's nervous because he knows Robinson's going to run, and if there's a short, a ball hit softly, he would cause so much turmoil on the field when he was on base, that and the audience, the crowds went to see that. They went to see this man in action. So now these teams are making more money because more fans are showing up, and they're realizing it's in my self-interest. Robinson is one of a kind, but guess what? There's others who have talent too, and we should let them in so that we can see more, so we could literally raise our game and make baseball a better game. And by part of being better is now there's more audiences, there's more fans, there's more money, all of which is good, all of which makes things better. And so here's where, the expression, we don't see black or white, we see green, it comes true, where your racism will only go so far, but if it affects your bottom line dollar, you're likely to change your mind. And that's a good thing. That's definitely a good thing. So
I want to just follow up on what you said earlier. So you said how sort of Jackie Robinson there, and it might be counterintuitive for a lot of people, but he actually was a symbol for individualism, and he helped to transcend these cultural norms or maybe these racist tendencies during the time. And the reason he did that, or how he did that, is that here was this black guy on the field who was unique, but because he was getting taunted, well, at least this is one aspect of it. He was getting taunted. You can identify with being humiliated. Anyone can, with being singled out. You don't have to be black to feel that. You can be overweight. You can be the new kid on the block, a new kid in school. There are an infinite number of ways that people can feel alienated, picked on. You're this underdog. You're the little guy. And so it's interesting. These taunts really have this counterproductive effect of making people love him more because they identified with him.
That's right. And also, Aaron, just let me piggyback on that topic and go a slight generation earlier. One of the best ball players of the 1930s, Hank Greenberg. If you could tell that name, he's Jewish. Jews were not really liked in that era either. And Greenberg was taunted, but perceptually, you can't really see that he's very different from the rest. But Greenberg told Robinson, they were competing against each other in a game, and Robinson made it to first base where Greenberg was standing as a first baseman, and he said to him, "You're going to make it." So again, he knew he knew the moral character, and that was coming up, and that helped. That inspired Robinson, because Robinson knew what Greenberg went through, 10 years earlier. And again, it's that individualism part and that inspirational part that gives you that more. All of these things play into the moral character. Okay, you can't have moral character if you're a collectivist.
Yeah.
If you merge with a mob, does that enhance your moral character, or do you do stupid things that you would not do on your own? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, this is a really good point too. I just want to say one last thing on this point. But the idea, though, that his effect, Jackie Robinson's effect on the culture was a big deal, because this is now you see a black person taking this kind of abuse and handling it with grace, not fighting back. And for many people, I'm sure people in the South, I'm sure people even in the neighborhood, seeing this maybe for the first time and seeing how a person can deal with this, it helps to impact the culture. You go, wait a second, these guys, if you did come from this collectivist background where it was just in the air that you would look at certain people in certain ways, this was evidence for you that, wait a second, this guy's good. It's not true. He's not uncivilized or violent or wild or emotional. As a
Mhm.
matter of fact, this guy is, well behaved or cultivated, or he has a lot of self-control and discipline. So it was events like this, I think, seeing maybe blacks in this light from on the ball field, on the movie screen, where people started to form, different perceptions of blacks.
Mhm. And also, Aaron, can we just transition here before we wrap it up to his post-baseball life and business? Let's talk about
Absolutely.
business. He founded the Freedom Bank in Harlem. Okay, and what did he want to do? He wanted Harlemites to become businessmen, because guess what? Business is good. That's your way out of the slum. Okay, Robinson saw that chock full of nuts was 80% black employment. They put him up there, profits rose, people are now more motivated to do their job, they're not fighting the man. And so business and entrepreneurship is a way out. Similarly, as we talked about, for anybody who takes agency, wants to be empowered, and wants to make the choices to be in control of their lives. And so Robinson showed that as well after his baseball career ended. And again, not only did he transcend the sport, but he knew there was life after the sport. And he not everyone's going to make it to the big leagues.
Yep.
So you need a fallback plan. And guess what? Business is a pretty good, it's a good way to go if you have a business mind. And he needs to be recognized for that, because again, that part, there'll be 50 documentaries and 50 things said about Robinson over these next couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
That one's not going to be emphasized enough.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point, because it shows his character was something that he had deep within him. It made him great on the field, and it made him great off the field, both in his professional life, that is in the chock full of nuts, and his professional life on the field, and his personal life with his family and with his children. So I think that's a very fitting place to end. To learn more, please read Robert's article at theobjectivestandard.com. I'll put link in the show notes. Robert, do you have any final words?
Yeah, there's a book I recommend, How to Be Like Jackie Robinson by Pat Williams. I use this as a lot of my source for that article I wrote for TOS, and I want to be like Jackie Robinson. That's all. That's all I could say. Mm-hmm.
Well, so do I, and I'll definitely I'll put a link to that book in the show notes as well. And thank you so much, Robert, for taking the time to discuss Jackie Robinson and why he is, in your own words, the greatest American hero. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Aaron. Bye-bye.